And welcome to the TH Fantasy Football Show with Pestle and Ed of TH Fantasy Football, joining you for the first time ever, not only on your podcast app of choice, but also on the YouTube, Edward. People can see us as well as hear us. What luck for our viewers and listeners.
Indeed, and I think most people are thinking, can they be as good looking as they sound? Yes, we
These
can.
Guys, yeah, they can.
Yes, they can. Yeah, very exciting. Another avenue to discuss all things fantasy. We love our podcast, but, why not try something new?
So if you're listening on your podcast app of choice as usual, thank you, welcome again. But once you've given us a download on there, help the algorithm and all of those things as well, head over to YouTube, give us a listen and a watch there, like, subscribe, share, etc., etc. But Ed, after our rundown of rookie wide receivers, that's often a tongue twister for me, we're looking at quarterbacks this week, aren't we?
We are, and yeah, as we discussed last week, quite a lot of talent in the wide receiver pool. But this year with quarterbacks, I'm not so sure. It was a stellar year last year for rookie quarterbacks, where we head into 2025 in the position that 6 potentially of last year's rookie could be starting quarterbacks in their sophomore year. I don't think the outlook is as rosy this year. Is there a CJ Stroud or a Jaden Higgins lurking? It's unlikely, but there is some talent, and none more so than the standout quarterback in this draft and our number one pick, and that is Cam Ward. Coming out of Miami, measuring in at 6'2". Do you want to drop your fascinating fact early, Mark?
And this is very, very fascinating. All of the top 5 quarterbacks here are 6'2".
Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Well, I find it very interesting. People, we get more interest in this if you found that boring. I find little numbers like that fascinating, but that's not going to give us fancy relevance, is it, Ed?
It is not. We want to know a bit about Cam Ward, and you can see if you're watching on YouTube some of his pros and cons. But essentially, he's in a tier on his own, I would say, in this crop of quarterbacks. He's quite an instinctual player, real natural feel for a pass. He's got an incredibly quick release and great pocket mobility, so he can find a pass if pressured. And he's mobile when he needs to be. He had 300 rushing yards last season, and he's got a strong arm to deliver a deep ball. Fancy Pancake described him as having ice in his veins, and I think that speaks a lot about his temperament under pressure. When we're looking at his cons, and with a lot of these quarterbacks this year, they do have downside. He can have quite lazy footwork that he'll need to work on in the pro game. He sort of fails to set himself properly, so he can be off balance when throwing. He can be a bit inaccurate throwing to the boundary out wide. And I think a big issue that I've seen with Cam Ward is his fumbles. And he's had 31 fumbles through 5 years in college, which is a very high number. He tends to hold on to the ball too long at times, trying to be the hero. And when pressured, he can fall apart, which is going to be a huge issue in the NFL unless he gets the right play caller who's going to protect him. So, yeah, a tier on his own. Would you agree, Cam Ward?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt about that, really. He is the QB1 of this draft. He is the only tier 1 QB, but tier 1's different to what tier 1 was last year, and I think looking at last year's quarterbacks, probably more tier 3 if he'd been in the 2024 draft. Probably, I think as well, yeah, as you say, it's that he's creative out of structure, but once he's out of structure and he has that pressure, he doesn't quite get his mechanics set right. There are questions about that decision making under pressure at times as well. And as is often the case, a top quarterback in the draft is often going to a team that has issues, obviously. He's going to face pressure in either of the landing spots, really, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of landing spot, it's probably going to be the Titans with the first overall pick. And he definitely will go to the top 3. If the Titans don't take him, then the Browns will. And if they don't, then the Giants will. But I think the Titans is where he's going. And I think they'd want him to start day 1.
Giants is interesting, obviously, after they've picked up Jameis Winston, followed by Russell Wilson. Could they pick up another quarterback in the draft?
It's unlikely after the business they've done recently, but I would say neither Jameis nor Russell are long-term prospects. So if Cam Ward fell to them and they saw something that they liked, then I think they would potentially make that investment.
I think in that unlikely situation, yeah, they would, or they're going to get an absolute haul trade in a way to someone else who likes them, aren't they? But yeah, I don't think he'll be there at 3, really. What about fantasy outlook? How are we thinking for next year for our dynasty and redraft drafts?
Well, he does have a fantasy outlook because he's going to be starting almost certainly where he ends up. So, in kind of one quarterback leagues, you're going to be taking him in the first round of rookie drafts, maybe towards the end of the first round with some of the other talent that we've got at the positions of wide receiver, running back especially. In Superflex leagues, in rookie drafts, you're going to be taking him possibly in the first 2 or 3 picks. So he has got fantasy outlook. He's not going to be, no matter where he ends up, he's not going to be an elite fantasy outlook. He's not that type of player, but he could have some fantasy value next year.
Who is next up at QB2? Any surprises, or are we going with the consensus?
I think we're being pretty predictable. We're going with the son of legendary NFL cornerback Deion Sanders. You see, Deion Sanders has just signed a 5-year, $54 million contract to stay in Colorado. Impressive. But it is, of course, Shedeur Sanders, who appears to be a love or hate prospect in this year's draft.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
He's, again, a bit like Cam Ward, that there are pros and cons. He's been described as a pro-ready quarterback, as Shedeur Sanders, and that's expected with the pedigree that he's got. Incredibly composed in the pocket, very accurate. I think what impressed me most was his throws down the middle of the field, in between the hashes. He's so consistent, hitting those targets. Quite often you'll see rookies overthrowing those or underthrowing those, but consistently accurate with those throws. A lot like Ward, he's got a very quick release. And he's just got this natural ability to understand where to go with the ball. And he'll go through his reads before picking the right pass. So he is quite composed from that point of view. Cons. Last year, and this makes me, as a Bengals fan, and the hits that Joey B has taken over the years, Shedeur Sanders has took a record 41 sacks in 2024. That's the joint most of any player in college football. Now, of course, the O-line is to be blamed partly in Colorado for that, but also some of those are on him. He's quite overconfident. Sometimes he just needs to bail, throw the ball away, and give up on the play, but he doesn't do that, and he ends up getting sacked. Sometimes he drops too deep into the pocket. So from what I've seen, that gives edge rushers a chance to get to him because he's dropping so deep in the pocket. And he quite often misdiagnoses where the pressure is coming from. So he makes a hasty decision that isn't really necessary. So he's a talented quarterback, and I think he does have a high-ish ceiling. But for me, there's too many issues there, and I don't know whether he's a long-term NFL prospect. I don't know what you think about him.
I'll be honest, I've gone back and forth. I'm out on Sanders based on the risks that I see and where I think he will go in fantasy drafts this year. That could change next year, different situation if he's had a few starts and he's looking settled. But where I anticipate he'll go in redraft and dynasty drafts, I can't imagine I'm going to pick much up, especially in rookie drafts. He does have my favourite stat of the 2025 rookie class, though. I'm not going to ask you if you know this, Ed, because I mentioned it when we did our mock draft with Fantasy Sanctuary with Rich over there the other day. 100 rushing attempts, minus 50 yards.
Oh, I forgot about that. That is an impressive rushing stat line.
And as we say, that's because of that dropping back, isn't it? That's on the design. That's when he's actually rushing. Then when you factor in the sacks as well, you should say 42 in 12 games. He's probably holding on too long, and that's where I put questions around attitude here. This is always a controversial thing when you question the attitude of any athlete, because to get where he's clearly there is a lot right about his attitude, obviously, but there's that overconfidence, as you've said. Of those 40 plus sacks, could he have thrown some of away? I'd imagine so. Did he think he could do it all? I'd imagine so. Lots of things being read into the way he handled himself at the combine as well. Not necessarily sure that's fair, But we've said on the podcast over the years, those quarterbacks where there are question marks about how they come in attitude wise, frequently that gives some negativity, at least in the early days, doesn't it? And we've seen that time and time again. Once again, I've never met the guy. I may be talking utter nonsense, but there's just a couple of those red flags there that give me enough pause for thought. Throw that in with those other question marks, and I'm not sure he's the fantasy prospect I'll be targeting this year.
Yeah, and don't get us wrong. There's an arrogance there with Sanders, and top players, of course, need that arrogance. But
100%, yeah.
It's that overconfidence. It is the line where he is too much. But yeah, I mean, landing spot wise, I mean, again, I've seen him going number 2 in quite a lot of mock drafts. If Ward goes number 1 to Tennessee, then Browns are also QB needy and they snap up Sanders. But if he got past those two, I could see him dropping quite a long way down the first round because, as you said about the Giants, maybe aren't as needy as they once were. And then if you look down the list, the next kind of 10 teams probably are okay at quarterback, unless, they're thinking differently. So he could go second, but he could drop.
And what about fantasy outlook? What we're thinking?
I mean, long term, possibly he's got a slightly higher ceiling than Ward if he can get the right coach or setup. But I'm not expecting much season 1. Again, like Ward, if he goes to the Browns, let's say, he's going to be fantasy relevant because he'll likely be starting next season. But, I think that's the only landing spot really where he becomes fantasy relevant. I could see him going early second round in one quarterback leagues. But again, first half of first rounds in Superflex leagues. Again, we use this phrase a lot. It's landing spot dependent.
If you are joining us on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and share. If you're listening on your podcast app of choice, set those notifications so you don't miss a single show from us each week. And also, why not? While you're there, why don't give us a 5-star rating? Trust us, and I'm sure you agree anyway. We most certainly deserve it. Someone who is not 5-star though, but is certainly someone who, to be honest, is part of the reason I would not draft Sanders, because I think there might be some value later on in our fantasy drafts. And I wonder if any NFL teams will think the same come the draft. Who have you got 3, Ed?
Yes, I mean, it could be a dart throw with this player. But he's a player who's rising up a lot of draft boards. He has the potential to be the best long-term bet at quarterback from this class. And of course, from my wonderful pun, we are talking about Jaxson Dart out of Ole Miss, weighing, coming in at 6'2". If you want to know his weight, it's 223 pounds. So
thank you.
Solid weight. And I don't mind Jaxson Dart. I don't quite see the hype. I know you do, but I'm not quite buying into the hype just yet. Pros, let's talk about positives. He is an accurate distributor of the ball. He's got quite good anticipation, good arm strength, decent athlete, certainly not a stellar athlete. I think it was Fancy Pancake talking about he's got strong intangibles, and those are the things we mentioned earlier. He appears to be a good leader, great character, and I've seen on a lot of videos that I've watched, lots of people who know a lot better than me say he's got huge upside. He's got that potential to grow into the role. The cons, is he pro ready? I think from what I've read, Ole Miss run a strange scheme that doesn't really translate well to the pro game because it lacks complexity. So that might be an issue, but that's something that he can learn if he's given the chance where he ends up to learn. Decision making can be slightly chaotic at times, and he can force a pass. And he's a bit inconsistent on his deep passes. And because of that scheme at Ole Miss, he's not really got the ability to progress through his reads as you might hope for. But there's definite talent there. And in some drafts, we'll talk about this in a minute, some mock drafts, I've seen him actually going like mid-first round. But what are your thoughts on Dart? I know you're higher on him than I am.
I think for fantasy, I'm higher on him because of the cost. Would I draft him early in my rookie draft? Absolutely not. But I don't think he needs to. And the stage you're taking him, I think he represents good value and high upside at a point of your rookie drafts where potentially the players you pick will do nothing and never actually get a start for you. Good runner, 495 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns last year. I think his stock would have gone up if he'd ran at the combine. It was interesting that he didn't do that. Interesting, though, for a fast runner, as you've already alluded to, is his decision making that needs to speed up. That window anticipation can be iffy as well, but they're both coachable. And that's what I think. I think the areas of weakness for him are coachable skill sets. In the right spot, he could offer really good fantasy value, but will he be drafted as the backup on his team and we have to sit it out? Also, there is a world where he does absolutely nothing ever. That is also on the table here. But as I said, I've said it already, if he's in the right spot, if he gets the crack at it, he could be probably that sort of player that is better for fantasy than real life. Seen a few Jalen Hurts comparisons over the last few weeks as well. I think he's an interesting player, and I'm really keen to see where he goes, and I'm really interested to see what he does next year, and hopefully have him sat on my benches or taxi squads.
Interestingly, the latest Bookie Brooks mock draft, I saw him going to the Steelers at 21, which I think would be an incredible landing spot for him. You know, great coaching setup. I think they'd be delighted to get him there. I think, as I said earlier, after you get past the top couple of picks, there's no one desperate for a quarterback. So I think he'll drop in the draft to first round, maybe second round. But yeah, I think Steelers could be someone to look out for if they don't look to be close to tying up a quarterback deal with anyone at the moment, do the Steelers? So maybe they're...
Oh no, because they're playing the game of give Aaron Rodgers some attention while he elongates it through the off season, doesn't they? But yeah, I can't think of I didn't think I could dislike the Steelers less or find Aaron Rodgers more tedious. I think an Aaron Rodgers Steelers combination.
It's a match made in heaven.
We will be talking about that week in, week out.
What dreams are made of. But yeah, getting back to Jaxson Dart, I mean, it's almost impossible to predict his fantasy outlook. I'd be surprised if he starts in 2025. Could be proved wrong. He could go anywhere in the actual draft, as I said. So, you know, if you're picking him up in rookie drafts, late second round, maybe early second in Superflex, but, you know, if he does end up at the Steelers and that's who they're going with, then that instantly ups his fantasy outlook. But yeah, he's difficult to predict.
Next behind the door, Edwards QB4.
Yes, right. So the next prospect is an incredible athlete, but does he have the complete game needed to thrive in the NFL? High risk, high reward, but he could be fancy gold. And that's Jalen Milroe. Now, I genuinely loved watching Jalen Milroe on tapes. He is absolute dynamite to watch. And I've seen so many people saying, if you just watched Jalen Milroe highlight reels, he would be going, 101 every single year. He's a phenomenal athlete. He's so strong. His scrambling ability is insane. I don't think it's a hyperbole. Do you agree to compare him to Mahomes or Lamar in this regard? His scrambling ability is that good. 20 rushing touchdowns in 2024. I mean, that is insane. And he's got a nice touch when throwing it down the field with great arm strength. And he can reach all areas of the field at a good speed. So, he's got that arm talent as well. Downsides, though, with Milroe, he's got that lack of natural feel that Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders have got, and he doesn't quite have that touch in the pocket. He can be inaccurate, can often force passes that aren't there. If you look at 2024, his passing touchdown to interceptions ratio was 16-11. That's way too close. That's too many interceptions. And he struggles the moment he moves off his first read. A bit like Dart, he also struggles to know, what a clean pocket is. his first thought is to scramble because he's so good at it with his ability. That's instantly what he goes to without seeing if there's a pass available first. So yeah, he's dead exciting to watch, but I'm not convinced he's pro ready at the moment. But right landing spot, right coaching, he could be absolute dynamite.
I think the comparisons with the scrambling of Mahomes, Jackson end at the point he pulls his arm back to fire the trigger, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's where it goes. He has got a big arm, but it's incredibly inaccurate. My comp for Jalen Milroe is a mortar cannon. It's going a long way, but you've got no idea where it's going to land. And that is the huge question. I mean, his passing stats are not a highlight reel. His rushing stats absolutely are. But if you're below 3,000 yards, below 65% completions, and only just above 15 touchdowns, that's not going to excite many people. But you're right. Does someone see him as a project? Does someone see him someone who's going to sit and learn? Is he coachable? I imagine the interview process for him through the combine process, pro days, and the visits is going to be absolutely crucial to where he goes. Because if someone thinks they can bring the best out of him, he could be an interesting project for a team.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I'm comparing him to Lamar in terms of rushing and scrambling. And he's not the passer that Lamar is and has become, but Lamar has been coached into a much better passer over a few years in a brilliant situation like Baltimore. So I'm talking Milroe up a bit, but I think it's unlikely he could get to that level. But he's you can't coach his phenomenal athletic ability, and he's got that in spades. In terms of landing spot, I have no idea. As I said, he's not pro ready. He's got that huge upside. Probably going to be a day 2 pick. The Rams or Steelers might like to develop him behind a vet quarterback. I think that's where if he ends up somewhere who have got a pretty like say the Rams, who've got Matt Stafford for a couple of years, almost certainly. If you can develop behind him, you never know. And obviously, a decent coaching setup in the Rams.
And I'm assuming fancy outlook is a vague prediction at this point.
Yeah, he might be worth stashing on your taxi squad. Late round 2, round 3 in one quarterback leagues. He could be a superstar in a couple of years. If he gets it right, he is a dual threat quarterback, and he will be, very fancy relevant. But he could also be an also ran, and we might never see him play the pro game. So I think fancy outlook next year is certainly very murky.
I think he's the sort of player I could imagine if he finds himself in a starting spot because of injuries, we'll be talking about that rushing upside a lot when we're looking at waiver wire pickups 1 week potentially.
I think we will do. You're quite right.
Finally then, in at QB5, who do you have?
Right, so we move on to a quarterback who had a phenomenal 2023, but his regression in 2024 was pretty staggering and is going to put off a lot of potential suitors. Which Quinn Ewers are we going to get in the NFL? A couple of years ago, last 3 or 4 years, certainly after 2023, he was talked up as kind of a generational, you hear that word a lot now, don't you? You can't have generational every year. Anyway, a generational talent, definite 101. But his 2024 has really put a lot of people off. He's another quarterback with great arm talent, both in terms of quick release, and he can certainly hit his targets on a well-thrown deep ball. Solid footwork, good timing when he's in rhythm. And he seems to have a good attitude and determination. Again, those intangibles coming in. But the downside, that huge regression, is it a downward trajectory? Or will teams try and look at the 2023 Ewers and think that they can work with that? He's got quite limited mobility, definitely not a dual threat from a fantasy perspective. He struggles to ever get past his first read. And too often his passes are floated. And he's also got quite a poor pocket presence, or certainly appeared to have in 2024. Is he going to be ever more than a career backup? I've seen him compared to Sam Darnold and the early Sam Darnold rather than the $100 million contract Sam Darnold. He could be a success in the right situation, but out of all the rookie quarterbacks, he's got the lowest ceiling for me. And the question I ask is, will he ever be relevant?
I'll go no.
No. Okay, right.
Did you want a binary answer to that?
Yeah.
It's I heard spoken about how when it's all going right, everything is good. As soon as something starts to go wrong, he falls apart. And your QB needs to shine when it's all going wrong. That's when they've got to pull it out of the bag. That's when they've got to rally people around them. He's struggled with injuries as well. As you said, he's not got the rushing upside. He does have a Sanders-esque rushing stat, 57 rushes for minus 82 yards. Yeah, I'm not in on you, as I don't think we'll be talking about him much beyond the actual NFL draft, and probably a taxi squad stash, because you got to pick someone, so I'll pick him there.
And in terms of where he ends up, who knows? I could see him dropping to round 3. So it's who's going to pull the trigger on him at that point. He's developmental. He's very unlikely to compete for a starting role next year. I'll put here Rams, maybe Vikings, Panthers. I don't know. Someone who's looking for a bit of a project. And fancy outlook, mixed would be very kind. I'm not sure if he'll make it off the board in quite a few rookie drafts. Again, depending on the landing spot, it might be worth a late pick in super flex leagues in your rookie drafts. But even if he does nail down a starting role, is he ever going to be a top 20, 25 quarterback in fantasy? Probably not. So he isn't somebody you're going to be falling over to get in your fantasy rookie drafts.
Or for me, even trying in the slightest, I think. I like a rash decision either way. So he is the player I'm out on this year. Other players to consider. Any other names you want to throw in before I give a rundown of the supporting cast this year, Ed?
I'll be honest, like a lot like last year, it was last year the top 5 was tough, wasn't it? And there were some also rans as well. Whereas I think scraping the barrel is unfair to Quinn Ewers, but I think even down, past him, if we're saying he's not fantasy relevant, the other names you're about to mention are almost certainly not fantasy relevant. But you can actually tape this and play it back to me when they are like a top 10 quarterback next year.
So, day 3 of the NFL draft presented by TH Fantasy Football will bring to you Dylan Gabriel, Will Howard, Riley Leonard, Kyle McCord, Tyler Shaw, all exist in the draft this year. And once again, we're talking about
on their highlight reel.
I'm sure they have a huge concern about what I think about them. Yeah. They're all there as well. Who knows? In the right situation, an injury during training camp, thrown into the fray in season, we could be talking about some of these players. I agree, though. I'm not convinced by Ewers. I'm not 100% certain I'm that bothered by Jalen Milroe at this point. But Riley Leonard is the one who I would go for as my absolute roll of the dice. This might be because I've seen more of him on UK's American football college game broadcasting. This is a team name I struggle with. Being European, it's Notre Dame, but I know that's not what they're called. So Notre Dame have been on Sky Sports quite a lot this year, so I've probably just seen more of him. He just seems to work through progressions well, has that rushing upside, but as he's a player I've seen, I don't know if that's just my soft spot for him, having watched a bit more of him this year. As people that don't watch a huge amount of college, he's one of the few quarterbacks I've actually got an opinion on before we got to this process. Landing spots, let's say it again one more time. They will shake all of this up. We will have very different opinions on some of these players based on landing spots. Players that I've maybe just cast aside may be a little bit interesting when we get towards draft season. There may be one or two players who go, they're sitting the whole of next year. I'm now going to just leave them on the taxi squad. Who knows? However, next week is going to be much tougher to make the top 5 because we're moving on to running backs, aren't we, Ed?
Very exciting. Yeah, a stellar class of running backs. One particular standout, but a big supporting cast below that as well. Yeah, really excited to talk through the running backs next week.
Before we wrap up then, we would like to give our own venture a shout out. The TH Fantasy Football Best Ball Bonanza 2025. We are back for year 3. We are open for you to sign up as well. So head over to th_fantasy_NFL on X or on BlueSky as well. Or go into the bio on YouTube and you can find the link there as well. We're hoping to raise loads more money for the Beast of Memory Cafe this year, an amazing local charity. And we're looking forward to some best ball drafts and playing some best ball with all of you once again in 2025. I think, Ed, for our first time on YouTube and our continued work on podcast apps of choice, we've said all the things for this week on quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think that we are all quarterbacked out, Mark.
So, as usual, but for the first time for our YouTube audience, Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to Pestle and Ed of TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Instagram and Twitter.